Good morning. Thank you for everyone who's shown up today on this rainy day. Today is September 29th, Friday, and we are opening up our Policy and Personnel Committee meeting to first nominate and approve a committee chair. Are there any nominations from the committee on who should be the chair?
I would like to nominate Deborah Brooks.
I would like to second.
All right.
I guess I'm outvoted.
Any other nominations? Any other nominations we should be aware of? No? All right.
Thank you, Dr. Shields.
All right.
Thank you to my committee members. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first meeting of the Policy and Personnel Committee meeting for the school year 23-24. Can't believe it, but yes, here we are. So first, we've worked with district personnel, Dr. Shields and Dr. Hines, to set our committee meeting dates. We will be meeting on, these dates have been approved by the board at our last board meeting, but we'll just make them public here as well. You'll note that there's a departure from years past. We're now meeting on Fridays from 10:30 to noon. And as I said in public meeting, Dr. Shields, I promise to not keep you here past, no. We're gonna make this work, because I will try to keep the agendas not as ambitious as last time, or at least 2 years ago. There's just one deviation from the Friday scheme, and that's just Monday, February 5th, 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. But as always, just keep your eye on the district calendar. So I guess, do we need to formally approve these dates, given the full board has already approved them? I don't think so. Or the majority of the board? Okay. So I know the minutes from June are going to be forthcoming at the next meeting, so we'll skip over that. And now, Dr. Shields, you have a personnel update.
Of course, yes. Just wanted to make the board and the community aware that we hired 21 new teachers this past season. You know, that takes place over the summer and over the spring. And we had a very successful new teacher orientation during the later part of August. So they're now in their classrooms doing the great work that we expect them to do. We also hired a new administrator, assistant director of technology. And we also hired the new position of the director of elementary curriculum. And that person is also in that role and working very closely with Dr. Feeney on the area of curriculum. So, you know, as you know, personnel is an ongoing process. We're constantly hiring because we realize that people come and go throughout the entire year. It's not something that only happens in the spring. So we get retirements mid-year and then we respond. And we put out postings and we hire for them.
Okay, and how many vacant spots do we have about? Are we in good shape?
So
Civil service stuff calming down?
Yeah, so things have calmed down a lot since our rush over the summer to fill positions. You know, the board was very generous in approving, for example, some new security positions in the district. So we have filled some of those new positions, but we still have a couple to go. We have, I think for the most part, we're secure in the area of teaching staff, which is good. Of course, people come and go, you know, with unexpected illnesses, and we respond to those as we need to. We had to reduce some staff in the area of paraprofessionals, and that was part of the budget process last year. So we reduced some people. But of course, new needs come up with new kids moving into the district that have CSE needs. So we have to respond to those as well. Sometimes that involves asking people to come back that we just let go. And, you know, we're very, you know, sensitive to the formality of that process, and it's based on seniority and, you know, very open lines of communication with the union that's involved. So I think for the most part, we're in really good shape right now from a staffing standpoint. And I communicate with the HR colleagues around Nassau County, and they're having struggles right now to fill positions. There's not as many people out there looking for work as the need, you know, really warrants. So we're going to keep plugging away to try and bring in people. So for example, in the area of clerical staff, there's a few clerical openings in the district. But we're going to continue to bring in new people. The board sees them on the agenda for appointment. But we're always working to try and fill those very few vacancies that we have.
I was going to mention that the public also gets to see on the agenda in terms of who is getting tenure, when their probationary term begins, when their tenure comes in. So that is available publicly, which I guess segues us into item 1.5.
Yes,
Question,
of course.
about just about the paraprofessionals, a little
Yeah.
bit. I know we reduced the number that we had,
Correct,
and our hope was we always have some attrition
of course.
in that population, and that attrition would take care of that. Did it fully take care of it? Do we now have the exact right number of paraprofessionals? And did we have to let anybody go?
So we opened school with the exact right number of paraprofessionals. What we had to do though is during that process, because we said it was gonna be around 25 individuals, right? So we had about 20 people that had decided to leave on their own. So there was about 5 people that we had to, what we call excess. And that also involves some people having to change their title from teaching assistant to educational assistant, because it's based on seniority in the unit. So we had those conversations with people in the early August, because by then we knew what the CSE needs were, and we could be really clear on what our needs were to open up school. What has happened though is, I have been in touch with those people that we had to let go, because now we have people that are leaving for other reasons, whether it's a retirement or whether it's an illness. So I've reached out to those other people on the list, and some of them would want to come back. Some of them would not want to come back because they've got new jobs. So the good news is the lines of communication are open. For example, 2 of the people I talked to yesterday are happy being on our sub list, don't want to work every day. Another person is a person we're going to bring back because we now have a vacancy, someone's leaving the district. And then that person's very happy to come back in a full-time role. So again, I'm also in touch with Pat Baglio, who's head of the paraprofessionals union, letting her know about all these different conversations that are taking place. So I think the hardship may have been for those people that were TAs that went to EAs, because they had a reduction in salary. They didn't lose their job completely, but they had a reduction in salary. But they have the right to go back to TAs when there's a TA need in the district. So when that happens, we will reach out to them.
How many of them fell into that category?
I want to say it was 5 or 6.
Okay.
But they're still employed by us, which is good.
Yes, okay. Item 1.5, the tenure review process.
Yeah, so this is a piece of information that we share with this committee this time of year every year. As you saw on the last board agenda, we list all the people that are up for tenure this school year. And the expectation is that in the spring, most of those people will be presented to you for receiving a tenure. Some of them may not make it through the evaluation process and won't be recommended. But we put it out there publicly for everyone to know who's up for tenure this year, and what their dates are for when they're expected to receive tenure. So this is the timeline that we established as a district. Once you approve it today, we share it with all the administrators and make sure they know that this is the process. They're aware, they expect this notice to come to them, because we've already shared the list with staff that they're going to have to do an intense analysis on before they're presented to us for tenure.
Now, I know the board knows this, but I'm just saying this for the benefit of the public. So the tenure review process is basically either 3 or 4 years, depending on the appointment of the individual. And every year, by state law, a principal and a teacher must be thank you. Yes. I was thinking the APPR, an annual professional review by a supervisor or by the superintendent, and that information goes into the file in addition to anything the public may send that may or may not go into that individual's file. And so by the time the person comes up for a review, you look at all that information, and that's the basis of granting tenure or not granting tenure.
Yep. So there's ongoing communication between me and the principals, me and the directors, and of course with the superintendent of schools, making sure they're up to date on how things are going. So when it comes time for the spring meeting and we're giving you recommendations, the superintendent's well aware of who's going to make the cut and who's not going to make
questions? Okay. And this is all on board docs, so the public can see the whole tenure review process outlined.
All right, the next item on the agenda is a policy that we've spent some time on over the past school year. It's a required policy. It's not one that we have yet, but it is one that we hopefully will have in place soon. It was brought to us by our attorney. There was some conversation last year about the tone of it. And then there was a second iteration of it with some minor edits. And it's back to the committee. I think I'm asking that it be a priority because we're supposed to have this in place. And I know there's a lot of conversation around it, but the sooner we can move it along, the better.
Okay, so I have some comments that I noticed, because this is the first time I'm looking at this as really a critical eye. I just have some grammatical stuff which I think doesn't have to be discussed here, but I do want to make sure I understand the intent of the policy and also that the intent is made clear. So this is for times when there's, when basically when there's a safety issue involved, yeah? Yes.
Do you want me to jump in with a little bit more?
Yes.
When you're done.
Okay, sure. So I just want to make sure as I was reading that. So in the first paragraph, the second sentence, it says, as a result, students with disabilities may require unique approaches to their management needs. What does that mean? Unique approaches to their management needs. Is there a better way to phrase that? Because I don't understand what that means. And I don't know if a teacher reading this will understand. Maybe they will, because maybe it's, professional language, management, I don't understand. So is there a way to clarify? Are these the right words?
I have a theme that's following yours as well. So, there's some language across this that still is judgmental to me and still has a tone that I'm not thrilled with. So for example, in the timeout room section, it says regain control in the very first line. At this point in our evolution as educators and board members, the terms really self-regulate. So I would like to see that maybe we kind of change that a little bit.
So instead of regain control, self-regulate?
Safely de-escalate and self-regulate to prepare to return to the educational program.
Okay, so self-regulate to prepare. So not to prepare to meet expectations, but to prepare to return?
Yeah.
Okay, so
And
then
then further down, there, it says self-control again, between the two highlighted areas to facilitate self-regulation, I think would be also a better way
I'm
to
missing
phrase
where
that.
you are.
Between the orange spots,
Where
order and skill building
Oh,
to
so
facilitate
the room will provide a supervised area to facilitate
self-regulation and skill building.
self-regulation.
Ms. Brooks?
Yes?
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. But Ms. has updated the policy, and the regulations have changed, the laws have changed, it's under, so perhaps, I don't know if our attorneys have seen, because the wording's changed, it's no longer called a timeout.
When?
In September, just now.
Just now.
So this
It's actually, it's called timeout for all students, it's not just, so I think, just so not to waste our time and then have to come back, maybe this is something that you need to send back to the attorneys. Because I'm looking at the policy from NISBA right now, that it's been updated based on state regulations.
What is the policy number on that
It's
one?
called, it's 4321.12. It was updated on, it says September 2023.
Huh, okay.
So I just think instead of us having this conversation and perhaps having to read, discuss, and I hear comments. I'm sorry for interrupting, I know that's not the process, but
No,
I didn't want you to waste your time.
I think that's fine. Does everybody agree?
Can I add one thing before we do it? So this draft is from our attorneys in the spring. This was our special education specialist attempting to moderate the language a little bit for us. Obviously, it's not quite what we want. I want to add one piece. I do think we should look at what the draft was. But last year, one of the things that was really concerning to the policy committee was that out of the blue, somebody reads this and thinks, what is happening in Port Washington? That we need these rules. And we had Dr. Allen here and she said, we don't even have timeout rooms in this district. We have to follow this policy because it's a New York State law that we have these policies and procedures available on the website. So we have to have it, but we actually don't even have timeout rooms here. So the thing that we had discussed that I think we should definitely add to the top of the policy is just a couple sentences saying exactly that. I think it should say, state law and regulation requires that schools have a policy and procedure on the use of timeout rooms, physical restraints, and adversives. Below is the Port Washington School District policy, or something like that, with a line to make it clear that this is here, not because the Board of Ed or the administration thought it was really important to lay this out, but because the state is required to get out of that.
So let's see what the update says and see if we need to put this in. And I actually wanted to add that one of the things that I hope to do, and I hope the committee will do this year, is to go back into the NISBA policy updates and see what we may have missed along the way that is required in terms of new stuff and required and then recommended in terms of updates, and bring some of this up to date. I missed this latest one, so my apologies. And also to work with our attorneys and ask them to make sure that what we are supposed to have, we have. That's the first thing. So just wanted to add that in. Okay, so does everybody agree then that we shouldn't spin our wheels and we should really see what the update says? Although I suspect the update may have some of the same language that we found problematic, but I don't know, so.
I actually, I mean, I don't see the update online yet. I don't know.
If you go on Board Docs, it's under Board Docs, under our 2023-2024 municipal policy updates. That tab that
Oh,
comes down.
like it's in our board docs.
It's in our-
Okay, because I can't
yes.
find it online.
That tab gives me no end of trouble. I don't know if it's the way I have
You
it.
have to just touch it very delicately.
No end of trouble.
So
The search function is just impossible.
I'm a little surprised because I don't think there's been another legal update. I think NISBA probably finally got one around to writing policy.
Well, let's
They
see.
changed the regulations as well, so
Let's see.
I think the best choice is to review again.
I think we should, but I think we're still gonna need a disclaimer at the top.
Yes, I understand.
Because, and I think we could even add a sentence that we don't have timeout rooms here. If we are 100% sure that we do not have even a single one hiding somewhere and aren't gonna have them, you know?
I think the aren't going to add them maybe down the road where we don't. We have no idea what this district will, hopefully will stay the way we are, but
That's our current
we have no
status.
idea what our needs are, so.
I mean, I
Will
think
be.
what it's true.
So-
What Dr. Allen was saying is, we don't actually even have the population in district that this would apply to.
I understand, so let's get this update, and then we'll have our full out discussion in
Okay.
October.
And I think Mr. Miller would be very open to having a conversation maybe with you about, like, if there's some language to tweak a little bit, I think he's very open to that.
Okay. And I think the language tweaking more is about culture
Yeah.
than legal.
Yeah, it's
Because Ned, I really hear you on the
Yeah.
tone piece.
Yeah.
And I think Mr. Miller would be flexible on the tone as long as the content is still of what he feels is necessary.
I'm finding it interesting that this came from, as you said, the special education specialist out of that office, so.
We're rulings out of it too.
I mean, the word, they changed the title of it.
Yeah.
Completely, but it's interesting because I don't, we'll check, but I think that this was in response to the change in regulation. right? And NISBA just hadn't done a sample policy. And so this new NISBA
We were on
one
it,
is
I think,
interesting
earlier
given the,
than they were.
right.
This
And
did
given
come
the
from
amount-
Howard, the draft that you started on came from Howard.
Right, and the redraft was his associate, associate in another attorney.
Mhm.
His law firm. I don't know if she's an associate.
So I think what Ms. Marconi is saying is that Port Washington was ahead of the curve in terms of complying with the regulation, and NISBA was just catching up. But nevertheless, let's look and see what NISBA has and see how it relates to what we've got, and we'll move forward in October. And we'll be sure to upload that to board, I will find that and give that to you and upload it to board docs so everybody has it.
Thank you. So the next policy is something that I believe came out of an audit report, policy 1500, our public use facilities. We've also attached the regulation for you. I'll turn it to you.
Okay, so, Ms. Epstein, met with the audit committee, I don't know exactly when, to discuss the internal auditor's report regarding the use of facilities, policy and regulations, and then publicly on June 6th, explained what the internal auditors found and what needed to be cleaned up. And what lands on this policies, in this policies lab, from what I can understand, and I hope Ms. Epstein will correct me, was from observation/recommendation number 1. This document is also in board docs, not only for the June 6th meeting, but also for today's meeting, so the public should have it. And the sentence that jumped out at me was, where it says, it's the second sentence in the recommendation, the district does not have a formal process to prioritize the issuance of permits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the report went on to cite language that actually is in our regulations as a formal process. So I was confused as to what that meant. I reached out directly to Dimitri at Norarky and Smith, and he said, actually, your language is fine. The issue is that the people in the facilities are not adhering to the process you have outlined. And so, so basically, our language in the policies, I said a million times, I just want to make sure, because I'm in charge of this, do I need to tweak the policy? He said, no. Do I need to tweak the regulation? Does the district need to tweak the regulations? He said, no, it's fine as it is. So I'm just saying that. Ms. Epstein, am I correct in my understanding, or was there something more
So
that?
I went back and just checked my notes from the meeting with him also. The only thing he did is he just recommended, if you want to recommend on the regulation side, to say more specifically, where it says it should be the responsibility of the director of facilities, is that it should be that, to say that, you know, they're going to have to meet with facilities, they're going to have to assess, they're going, you know, they want to spell it out more clearly, but that's for this, you know, to recommend back out to the whoever's writing the regulation aspect. He just said if you wanted to clarify it, that's what my notes said. So that's the discussion to be had here, if they want to work through that on their process.
I think clarification is always good if where clarification is needed. What does the committee, in other words, there's
What
nothing.
sentence are you referring to?
It's in, it's a citation that Deborah was looking at.
Yes, so I will
Looking
tell you
at
what it is.
1500 R 2.6, where it talks about if 2 or more applications are received for the use of the same facilities for the same days, it should be the responsibility of the director of facilities. He just said if you want to elaborate on that and make it much clearer that the priority order is going to be assessed, that they're going to, you know, how are they going to make it equitable? He said adding language to that part of it. Are you doing a timestamp? Are you not doing a timestamp and adding more clarity? Because right now it doesn't give, you know, if someone went back and said, well, I happen to know I called first and I got this, you know, but then I didn't get the priority, our regulation at least would say, oh, we're using the timestamp method, or we're using the alphabet, or we're using frequency of our vendors, or whatever the circumstances may be. I don't know what the facilities department is using or not using, but he just said if they work out something, you may want to clarify that more for someone applying for a permit.
Okay, so in my understanding, we as a policy committee don't write regulations.
Correct.
So
This is
these are
internal.
recommendations that should be going to our administrators, no?
Internally, because they understand the workings of the school district. The only thing I would say is if as a committee, we would want to recommend to the board that certain groups get priority over other groups. I'm not saying that we should do that. I'm simply saying if as a board, we feel strongly that yes, we should give priority to X group if B group comes before X group, but so I don't know that I want to step into that, but I think that's the only place I see us being involved in the prioritization.
Can I make a recommendation again? I'm totally messing up your order, I know this. So you
Say
can
it loud.
tell- You can tell me no. Just
Go
if
ahead,
you-
I'm not.
Can I recommend that we send, so the directive can be from the policy committee to the administration regarding the regulations, because that's what, we don't do that, which is what Ms. Melconian said. However, I think what we should maybe consider is that it goes to our facilities department, because it's our facilities, right? I imagine that they'd be the ones who are writing the regulations, Dr. Shields, right? Right. So perhaps, and what we've done in the past when we've done these type of discussions about budget and facilities policies, is we've had at least the administrator involved in the conversation. Other times we've had joint meetings, the policy committee and the budget and facilities committee, so that we can actually get the work done. So I'm recommending that maybe we send it to the facilities department and maybe we discuss it at a budget and facilities meeting. And the benefit here is Ms. Gilliard is on both committees, so she could definitely be the voice representing both. But I think this belongs at facilities, because it is a facilities issue.
Yes, I agree, but at the June sixth meeting, the issue was it would be bifurcated. Some of it would go to policy and some of it would go to facilities, but now as policy, we're saying, because it's regulations, it will go to facilities. I will say that when I looked at NISBA's sample template from 2016, which is what ours is from, they just pulled out things, headers. So, for example, in our policy, we have fees as a header, but we don't have any other headers. So I would just suggest we add headers such as permitted uses, prohibited uses. This is minor, really, in the grand scheme of moving this policy along. But since it's here right now, those are just my recommendations, and just adding some language under prohibited uses, and that's like any use not permitted by this policy is prohibited, right? So that we can't start to make up uses now. And then, but I can send you my proposed language. It's not changing the substance really very much. It's not. And also I would just add that we're supposed to allow military access somewhere in there.
Yes, it was there.
Is it there? I don't know if I saw, maybe I missed it. But I do know I can find the language. And I will bring back the sample template from 2016, so we can see where that
Local
language is.
police and volunteer fire departments and veterans organizations?
No, there's something else, something allowing, I'll find it, it's in the NISBA template, I'll find it and I'll bring it back. And also adding references to the laws that regulate this, which is Education Law 2-A and 414. But let's bring this back with the template, which I was able to find after you had already put this in board docs. The NISBA templates are very wonky on my computer. Yes? Yes, there we go.
I just want to pull it back for a minute to the comment from the auditor about, making sure it was equitable of this timestamp conversation. Because I'm not sure where the requirement is even coming from, that we would have to take them in the order that they're submitted. And if that's something that we're not legally required to do, is that something that we actually want to put in writing and require administration to do? Because it seems to me that in the regulation, this list about how conflict would be resolved if things are on the same date is a list that makes a lot of sense, because it makes sense that if you have two groups wanting the same space, that as a district, we should be able to say, well, which one is the group that has the impact on the community, serves our kids, which is the one that should get priority.
And that's what I was trying to say, that we may as a district decide that certain groups get priority over other groups.
But we
Yes,
also have our
Dr.
administration have that power.
I,
It says that in.
I have a feeling that Mr. Graham has a process in place that maybe we're not aware of, that we could maybe share with the policy committee. And then if there are things that maybe you would want to consider tweaking at some point, but I can pretty much guarantee that there is something that he has in place that he's using right now, if there are competing organizations potentially for the same space at the same time. And then from there, maybe we can tweak things if we need to.
That would be great, if he could either share that language with us, or if he wants to come as an invited guest, he's more than welcome. Specifically, in paragraph 2.6 of the regulations. Because I wouldn't want to say that he should just go ahead and change them
Totally.
within the written document without at least sharing it with us, even though we're not in charge of writing the regulations. We sure do want to make sure that they're within the spirit of the policy.
100%.
Okay, great.
I mean, I think this note that the permits are issued based on the chronological order must be coming from the auditor speaking with our facilities department, because I actually don't see it in our regulation unless I missed it. So I think this is from interviewing them. I would actually just love a little more background information on why our auditors would put this as any risk rating at all. Because it seems to me like a consultant level analysis of, hey, I don't know how exactly you do that thing that you told me that you do, but what is the risk here? Like, is there a legal obligation that we're not meeting if we don't spell this out better? What risk?
Well, I can only go by the conversation I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think you're asking fair questions, and I think if you're looking for more insight into how the process is handled, I'm sure Brian would be glad to come and talk to you about that. And he could recommend some fine tuning of the regulations to you as well.
Yeah, because the other thing is that when the internal audit says, we noted that certain outside organizations receive permits for the use of whatever fields for 90% of the available days, that's not telling me that anybody else wanted to use the fields. So I don't know,
Right.
I guess I don't, now that I'm hyper reading into it, after you read it 90 times and the 91st time you see something different, and that's what's happening with me right now. I don't know that that means that they were given priority, that there was even a conflict. And maybe they're the only ones who wanted to use the field. So I don't know the answer to that question. All I know is that the auditor, what the auditor said to me was, you have a process, it's just that the district's not following the process. So why don't we give it back to the regulation makers and see what they say and how they would tweak this paragraph 2.6. Because what we want to do is make sure that we go back to the auditors with something that is more than satisfactory to them. That's our job here.
Do you think it makes sense for you to also speak with the auditors again?
Well, I would need specific questions, I guess, from the committee. Because the only thing I did was try to understand his sentence. Like, I just want to say, why did you say this? But if you have broader questions that would help clarify what this is, I guess it's appropriate for either Dr. Shields or me to go back where policy is
Say
concerned.
that, maybe what makes sense is to get the information from Brian, be clear on what we think things should be, and where we wanna go. I just don't, it feels like this could end up like a tail wagging the dog situation, and I wanna make sure we're doing what we think is right, and ends up with our facilities being used the right way. I see from the auditor overall comment, the idea that we need clear procedures, we need to make sure that we are renting out our facilities in a way that is financially sound for the district.
Which is budget.
Right, and that makes sense and is fair and serves the community. I just don't want us to inculcate in policy or regulation, rules that bind our administration to something we don't want them to be bound to as a result of a stray comment from the auditor that may have no repercussion.
So may I suggest that I meet with Brian Graham, point out what I believe he already knows, is that we have a policy in place, that we have regulation in place, ask him to review it. If there's any recommended language specifically to paragraph 2.6 that he would like to add, and then he can bring that back to you. So you get the first-hand insight as to how his office handles the procedure. So I hear what you're looking for, is you're looking really for our insight into what is the detailed, practice in his office. And I think that's a curiosity for you to have, to make sure that we're following our policy and that our regulations are in the tone that we want them to be.
Yeah, I think that where law is concerned, there are certain prohibited uses that we must adhere to, and then the permitted uses. But there's also a measure of discretion involved. And I was trying to find that word within the policy. And I think that 2.6, prioritization, is a discretionary issue, but it can't be whimsical discretion. So I think that we don't want to tie the district's hands, but we also don't want the district we also want the district to have a certain amount of clarity. That this is clarity, but with discretion. And so I think maybe that's what we're aiming for in paragraph 2.6.
Yeah. And I will say that, we have very good relationships with the organizations that want to use our building. And I'll give you an example. There's 2 organizations in town that are always looking for indoor gym space during the winter months. They come to us with very long schedules for their teams, and they say, hey, how can we work through different buildings in the district to get some of our teams the ability to have access inside? And they work together, even from organization to organization outside of the district, saying, hey, there's only so many gyms that we can use. So it's a very collaborative process. And for the most part, I think people walk away understanding what the limitations are, but what the opportunities are as well for our great facilities that we have, and we're fortunate to have those.
I think that's important, the relationship part of it, and so the example I'm thinking of as I sit here and look at this is like, if we were to put in policy, like the first one in gets it, right? We have a summer camp that rents one of our elementary schools for 6 weeks every summer, right? We have an ongoing relationship with the summer camp. I'm sure at some point somebody decided this is a very cost-friendly summer camp compared to the other options. It's a benefit to our community, we have it here. What if at the 6-month out date, a different summer camp submits their facilities request and the next day, this one submits it? So we really want in writing in policy or regulation that our administration must rent to this other random summer camp instead of the one that's been in the elementary school for I don't even know how many years and is, run by 4 teachers and attended by 4 kids, right? We don't want to create a situation where we remove discretion where it should be. And I think there are many organizations like that, Court Soccer too, which is on this list, like rent certain kinds of spaces every single year and serve the community of Newport Washington students, and we want to continue that relationship. We don't want it to be a race to the drop box, at the 6-month mark.
Right, so I guess my buzzwords are clarity, fairness, discretion, because that would allow discretion. Whereas time stamping is pretty set in stone.
Sure.
Just as an example. Okay, so I think we're clear, yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. We got that horse meeting, okay. And next, item 1.8, thank you.
1.8 is our class size policy and our regulations. The committee had asked that this be looked at this year. Like I believe it was in response to a comment that might have been made during a public board meeting. So what I've attached for you here is our policy of 4420, which is class size maximums. And these are considered guidelines for the district. Then you look at the regulation that gives you a little bit more detail by grade band. And of course, when we have overages and even, very small classes, we bring that to the board's attention, typically in the fall of each school year.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure what we're because I'm not sure what we're supposed to do with this, because space in the district is finite. And unless we're talking about the board establishing policies where if we have limited space in a building that we're now creating a new section in a different building, I'm not quite, I've always been flummoxed by this.
Mhm.
So either we approve the overage because if we've run out of space, I'll just pull out of a building, I'll say daily, from my experience 10 years ago. Class size was beyond the maximum 5 years in a row, and I know because I lived this dream. And I thought to myself, well, there are no more classrooms in the building, so and we can't exclude the kids, right? We can't teach them outside, so what are we doing? Are we moving them to Susa, where there was I'm philosophically, I understand class size, but practically speaking, what is the solution, right? Other than to waive the maximum, to try as best as we can to even out the kids within the classrooms per building, right?
I
So,
think that's how we wound up with portals at a certain point in our history.
because we outgrew the buildings. And short of building new portals, right, because we just had major construction, if we're outgrowing, so I'm just not sure.
Portables.
Portables, yeah.
Sorry,
I think
portables.
This would be
I'm-
much more safe.
Portables.
I mean, I just don't understand what logistically we as a district can do. Dr. Hines, I don't know if you, or Dr., I don't know
We
if you have
won't like what I have to say.
recommendation?
but-
Say
I
it.
think certainly, if we know that certain sections are on the high end, then we have new families who register, right? And we know we're almost at the tipping point. We put a cap in place, and then the new families would have to, even though they're in a catchment area of one school, they would attend a different school. The other thing,
I'm sorry, is this what you're currently doing in practice, or is this
What
what
could
you're
happen.
suggesting?
I might be suggesting,
Well, it's been done.
Yeah, it's
In the
been-
recent past.
yeah, but so that, and it doesn't happen that often, but it does. The other is rezoning and looking at the encatchment areas themselves and determining whether, if we've seen a massive increase in school X and a decrease in school Y, and looking at the lines and redrawing what those lines look like. I am not saying we should do that. But that is another way to go about, possibly opening up, because we do have some elementary schools that have classrooms that are utilized in different ways, not for classroom space, but for supports or whatever it may be. So I don't think it's a capacity issue overall. If you look at, let's say, all the elementary schools. Now, I think it's a different conversation when you get to the secondary level. Most notably, let's say Schreiber, where I know the board has heard, and certainly have, of some classes that are over 30, right? I'm not talking about phys ed, I'm not speaking about, let's say, other types of classes like that. And that comes down to scheduling, what the master schedule looks like. Because for as many classes potentially that we have over 30, we also have several classes that are under 15. And so, we take a real approach in looking at what that looks like and how we could possibly redistribute some classes, closing some that are lower enrolled, and then, splicing some of those other classes, some of the AV classes that we know that are currently in place right now, that have well over 30. But they're not popular decisions, especially the rezoning one, because I've lived through that.
We have two.
The other
Yeah.
issue is that, I mean, in my lifetime in the district, which hasn't been that long, I've seen daily go from literally exploding where you could not walk in the desks were up against the wall, right? You could not walk through one aisle to now being within the class size, and I think that I don't know if I'm in favor of rezoning, that's obviously a bigger board conversation, but, do we put that in the policy? If, I think that it makes a mess of things to think, only because there's the ebb and flow, there's a constant ebb and flow based on who's moving and we don't have a whole lot of construction, right? And so, I'm just not sure what I'm supposed to do with this policy and the regulations in terms of changing it.
So I think one of the comments that's been made recently is, we think of things in the form of the maximum. And there are some people in our school community that think we should be thinking about things in the form of the optimum range instead of the maximum. Or a minimum, yeah, or getting closer to the minimum, right? So what we do is we monitor the enrollment per class, especially at the elementary level, to make sure that we're not exceeding the maximum. And the good news is that right now, we're able to stay within these numbers. We're not bursting and needing to either open a new section or move someone to another building because we're on a school. We do have some flexibility in our buildings right now, if we had to. I think the other issue is at the secondary level. There are some of those classes, especially at the high school, that are above the numbers that you see recommended here of 30. I think the board's been very aware and supportive in bringing in some new staff each year as we look at the recent budgets. So we've helped to bring that down a little bit. And we really want to give kids the opportunity to choose their courses and not be capped and limited in what they can pick up and can't pick up. So I think the board and the administration work very closely on how to manage these numbers the best we can. So I don't think there's an ask that you change the policy, but I do think it's healthy to look at it and say, does it represent what we want? And if you feel that, hey, this is what we stand for now, maybe let's bring it back again in a year or two and say, do we still stand for this? Because I think that's where the question came from. Is your maximum something that we should not be pushing towards? Should we be focusing more on an optimal level?
Well, the regulation does say, optimal.
It's very clear.
Right?
It
It
is.
does say that in the
And it's
regulation.
a guideline which gives the board and the administration flexibility to work within those numbers. And we're very mindful of them.
And I guess my question is, but what, other than having a child go to a school outside of their zoned area, what is the alternative? This is the part that I just didn't, and redistricting, which you probably will have to do on a very frequent cyclical level because the
Fortunately, we're not in a position where we need to consider those things. We have been in the past. I can recall, a student having to go from one elementary school to another elementary school because we'd maxed out at that building.
Yeah.
Those are hard conversations, but you work with the families. You don't send siblings alone. If they have another sibling in the building, they go together. You keep the family dynamic as a priority. And in those rare cases, it's worked, but it is rare.
And it's not in policy, so, right, so I just.
But that's what's good about the policy, is
That's
it
right.
gives administration the flexibility to be very mindful of kids' needs while also balancing the school's needs.
I think, I have different comment, but I think, to my recollection, we did this most recently in the last maybe 6 years, where we had overcrowding at Guggenheim. And so we had new families at Manor Haven. New families at Manor Haven were instead sent to Sousa,
Okay.
but it was the entire family.
Yes.
And people were perfectly fine with it because it was people that would be joining a new school anyway as a family, and they were still bused, and
They're allowed to stay.
there was no upheaval to the situation, unlike rezoning, which would create a lot of upheaval because these were families that didn't have any attachment to a certain school. They had just moved into a house in a Manor Haven zoned area, and Manor Haven was busting at the seams, and there was room in Sousa.
There were also students who were kept at particular buildings who had moved and weren't moved with their move because of accommodating class size.
So I'll ask
And they were appreciative of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll ask a different question now. Given the recent construction at the various elementary schools, where some have been enlarged, some haven't, I don't wanna make more work for the facilities people, but, these, and I know that classrooms have to be a regulatory, they have to be within a regulation size. I don't know that all of our classrooms are actually the same size, so I don't know if the optimum class size was based on the square footage of the classroom or the student to teacher ratio.
That's your question.
And so I'm just wondering now, with the addition of classrooms and teachers in some of the buildings, does that change any of the numbers here? Because in one school, the numbers, so I guess my question is, if it's based on student to teacher, then it doesn't matter, that ratio should be the same. If it's based on square footage of the classroom, is this something we should look at? Like, what?
So I think maybe there's a somewhat different way to look at the question you're asking. And I think it's in line to a philosophical question. You know,
Because it does say, the board shall determine, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to, shall determine appropriate ranges for the pupil to teacher ratio and or class size. So that's why I don't know what these numbers are actually based on. Are they based on pupil to teachers?
yeah, I'm not sure. I think because here's, and I know most of us have heard this, what the research says regarding class size and different levels, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school. And I think the question becomes, let's just say in a perfect world, we had all the space in the world, we had all the teachers in the world to fulfill whatever we're looking for. The question becomes, do we feel that at the maximum, 18 is too high for pre-K? Do we think it should be 15 or 16? At the primary K through 2, as we know, that's where the foundation is really laid for many of our kids, including pre-K, is 23 too high? As a board or as a policy, committee, do we think, or as a superintendent, do we think it's too high at 23? And the same goes for Weber and Schreiber at 30, capping it at 30. And then working backwards from there and doing the math and saying, all right, well, we have X amount of classroom spaces at the 3 different levels. We have X amount of teachers at those 3 particular levels. If we thought for some second that, primary, it should go down to 20 instead of 23. So I've heard this has been brought to my attention many times from teachers, and I'm sure as board members. 23 is too high with all the work that we have to do. It would really help. So what are the implications as far as extra FTEs would we have to hire? And then would we even have, I think to your point, do we even have enough space if that's the case? And to go through that exercise, if that's something that the board and or this committee would like for us to do. Because I really do think it starts with what do we feel is in the best interest of kids? 23 is too high? Then we would have to have a conversation about that. I can tell you that 3 through 5 teachers would definitely say 26 is too high, depending on the makeup of the class and the needs that have been taking place. I'm not advocating for it, I'm just saying, I think it would have to start there, and then for us to look at the physical plant itself, and then the number of teachers that we actually have.
So that was actually going to be one of my questions, which was, what do our educators believe are the best numbers to operate from? And is this represented here?
Yeah, this is like a third rail being live streamed.
So
Might as well rip off the Band-Aid, as you like to say, right?
So I think the way this was questioned, I think it's important to step back to how the question was raised to us, right? Which was that these numbers were increased when we had budgetary constraints in this district that are thankfully behind us somewhat, right? We're not, nobody's rolling around in piles of money, but we don't have the kind of budgetary problem we had when this policy was changed. And I don't actually know what the, looks like December 2003 policy read like, or what those numbers were. But the comment was that all of these maximums have been increased for the 2013 draft of this policy because of the budgetary issues. And if we are now past these budgetary issues, shouldn't we be rolling back these class sizes to where they were before, right? Which I think then brings us to Dr. Hines' question, which is, what is the optimum, right? Having the conversation about what the numbers really should be. And I think when we talked about it in the spring, we raised it as really, we wanted to hear from the administration if we thought that a change needed to be made here. I see your space comment, but to me, the policy is an ideal, and what we should be striving for doesn't have any teeth, right? So at the end of the day, the administration, no matter what these numbers are, the administration is going to be coming to the board, making a practical recommendation about what the number of classes are in each elementary and which classes we still have that are going over the maximum and which at the secondary level are going to be under the minimum, and why we're making those choices. I think practically everything would still function exactly the same way, right? If we were to lower these class sizes and said maximum class size of 10, we couldn't do that, right? We could change, we could pass whatever policy we want. The next conversation that's gonna happen is a conversation about how every single class has to be on maximum because we can't possibly house more classes than that. So I think, to me, the meat of this and the reason for the policy committee to be discussing it was to hear information from the administration over whether or not it made sense to make a change here. Even if the recommendation is that the change isn't necessary, I think it's important to publicly have the discussion about what goes into deciding about these, and also think about, are we aiming for maximum, or are we aiming for optimum, or are we aiming for minimum? And the piece that's not mentioned in this policy at all, that I know happens behind the scenes, is particularly at the elementary level, I know when you're hitting the higher end of these ranges, there's an EA or TA in that classroom too, and there's some thought going into what the adult to student ratio in the room is and how to make it work better for the teacher. I don't know that that needs to be in policy, but I think it would help to talk about it, even though we have publicly before, and make it clear that that's in here and it's being analyzed. So I'd like to hear a recommendation, and I don't know that it needs, that you're even ready to make it today. I know our educators think the maximum on all of these should be lower. And I'm sure that there are many parents who think the maximum on these should be lower. So the question really is, does the administration and the board think that these numbers should be lower to make clear what the ideal is that we want to be reaching for, instead of it having it be like, okay, well, we're at 30, we're fine, right? And we don't have a conversation about it. Wherever the maximum is forces us to have the conversation about the fact that we're pushing up against a maximum. So I guess I'd like to hear more from the administration.
I mean, first, not that I try to lead any thought with budgetary implications, but I think we would need to have a firm understanding of, again, if we went down from 26 from grades 3 to 5, let's just say hypothetically, to 22, you know, what would that actually cost, you know, throughout, if we moved in that direction? I would feel more comfortable going through that type of cost analysis for maybe what we think philosophically before having that discussion, because the reality is, you know, and we know this, not to get to the budget right now, but all the federal funds dried up now, right? And we have all those AIS teachers that were embedded, right, with that funding. And we have to think about what that looks like for next year. And the only reason why I'm mentioning that now is because then, if we come up with, say, you know, some maximum threshold that we would feel comfortable with at any grade level, and let's say we would have to add 6 or 7 teachers to fulfill that, you know, so we stay under whatever that is it worth it at the expense of all the other supports that we've had in place for the past 3 or 4 years? You know, so, and I don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul when it comes to something like that. So I think if you allow Dr. Shields and I to bring it back to the cabinet, to engage in this type of conversation, we can come back and talk about where we are. But I think we would need Kathy to run some numbers, just to see, potentially what that would entail. If that's okay.
I mean, I think the additional piece of information too is, how many or what percentage of our classes actually are at the maximum class size. I would venture to guess that all our
Very few.
elementary school classes are not, right?
Very
Like, very few
Yeah.
are at the maximum. So, there's that piece as well.
There is.
Like, if we're discussing that we're shooting for the optimum,
Sure.
and that is really what's already happening on the ground.
Yeah.
It's maybe not necessary for the board to step in.
And I think, to your point, Rachel, I think there are many teachers who would say, listen, I've had classes of 17 that felt like 28 because of the construct and of the class, the behaviors and all those different things, personalities that are there. So I know a lot of thought goes into that as well. And sometimes you're a teacher, a class of 30 and it feels like it's 15 just because of, the construct of the class. So there's a lot of different, edges to consider. I'm glad we're talking about this. I think it's a worthwhile topic for us. So yeah, we'll do that and come back.
The only thing I would ask, and I'll just throw it out there, in the policy where it says that the board shall determine appropriate appropriate ranges, and shall consider the nature of the learning activities, students' abilities, needs. Do we need to have something in there, and also given straight space and budgetary constraints? Do we need to have that in the policy just so the public understands that there are space and budgetary constraints at times? Like at one time, when did Salem open? Julie, was it 2004?
2004.
Yeah.
2000, right? So
Dr. Shields was there.
Dr. Shields, okay.
Julie wasn't
So the time before last, when this was revised, was December 2003, when Salem wasn't even there, right? So however we got all of these students, I don't know what the maximums were then, but obviously we've filled to capacity, adding another one, right? So is it necessary to add almost like a disqualifier or a disclaimer, saying, given budgetary and space constraints, this is what, the district feels is.
Yeah, I can share with you that it was in 13 that it was increased by 2.
Right.
In each band.
So the minimum, the optimum, and the maximum,
The maximum here,
Or
you see in the policy,
the maximum
just
is all
subtract
this
2
by
from
itself.
everything in the right column.
Okay.
And it would never change.
What the-
They don't stay the same.
So it's the maximum numbers that change. So
They just went up 2.
yeah, it shows the growth in the district. Either that or we send out an advertisement telling people not to come here, right? Which is not what we're going to do. I hope I'm being tongue in cheek. But I think maybe if we could, just consider adding something maybe based on space and budgetary constraints.
Are you ready to the maximum?
I'm sorry?
Oh, wait. Are you ready to add the maximum? So why add the budget and constraints if you have a maximum? If we
Right,
could
but
have the word
sometimes we
maximum.
have to waive the maximum. Sometimes we vote to waive it.
Sure, I have some comments on that, but you want to.
Yeah, if you could, just because almost, I do want to get through.
I guess for next time, I think it would be nice to understand if we actually have a problem here, right? And if we don't have a problem, I could see an argument for putting the numbers back down anyway, if we're in compliance with a number that's too lower, or at least for some of them.
We can't, the
And
high
I
school
think-
is never gonna comply.
Well, so my next sentence was gonna be, I think that the conversation is very different at the high school, because I think some of the time that we end up at this maximum or over, it's because we want our students to have access to a course
Correct.
that they need to be able to take. And the implications for them would be much worse if they're locked out of course.
Correct.
And when we're below the minimum, it's because we feel it's important for our students to have the variety of courses that we offer here,
Yeah.
which is pretty remarkable,
It's a first point,
actually.
yeah.
So I think that we have to understand, we have to bifurcate the conversation, there are very different concerns here.
Yeah.
Just
So we'll certainly discuss it at the cabinet, we can come back to you.
to your point though, Deb,
Yeah.
in terms of the title of this, it's really, right, the pupil teacher ratio and/or class size. So the class size in this reference is the actual physical structure. So perhaps we create a better title than just simply using the term class size.
Yeah, do you have any suggestions as to what that title should be?
I mean, it's right here, it's pupil
Teacher
teacher
ratio.
ratio and/or class size. Like, I think we need to be clearer than the language we're using, but that's just a minor suggestion.
I'll make a note of that.
We should probably just take a look too, well, I mean, it hasn't
Like
been that in
a
10
NISBA?
years, yeah, like, I can't find it now, but let's see what the NISBA.
I couldn't find a NISBA policy, but
Oh,
I will
okay.
reach out to them, I will reach out to them and see. And I know New York City struggles with this, greatly, but that's a whole different issue, but, okay. Yeah, I think so. Look, this is an important policy, it's, right, it's basis of the classroom,
It's an important conversation to have, but I think that Dr. Anne's point has to be highlighted in this, which is class size is really important, but the overall educational program is also very, very important.
Yes.
And making sure that we're not reducing other educational opportunities here to comply with the number is also important.
Alrighty, and then finally, item 1.9, our update on policy 1800. I'm guessing you brought this back just to tell the board that an internal review was done.
Yeah, I wanted to just update the board because we've had a conversation around information being shared with the board about where our donations come from and where they're being allocated to. So I met with Ms. Manuel Business Office, and we talked about could there be so there's already a report of all the donations we get that the board receives. But I asked her, I said, from the board's perspective, they're looking at this through an equity lens. Is there a way to create a report that breaks things down by school? And there's, of course, some things that we receive that don't go to a specific school, they go to the whole district, or they go to all elementary buildings. And so that would be broken out separately, district-wide or elementary-wide. So she thought she could do that for the board, so you could have a glimpse into what it looks like per building.
I thought we got that in the packet,
Yeah.
because I remember looking
Like
at
that,
it.
You received it that fast, I'm
Yeah, we
impressed.
did, we got it. And I'll just say that one of the things that struck me the most in this exercise is that there are some teachers in some buildings who are taking more advantage of grant opportunities, especially through the Ed Foundation, than others. So when I saw 6 figures in terms of money for, I don't remember which school it was.
Middle school.
I don't remember. I thought, okay, so then
It's Salem
was it Salem?
and Weber.
and I thought, well, but we can't force personnel to take advantage of grants, and then that goes into a different equity issue that I've always had about outside funding sources, but, so I appreciate the exercise, and it is in the policy that this annual report needs to be given to the board. And maybe there are also internal things that are outside the board's purview that maybe we can either help teachers who don't know how to get grants or encourage more teachers to take advantage of grants. I don't know how that works internally. But if you see, activity in some buildings that isn't being taken advantage of in others, then
Sure.
that's just
And this is something we're very aware of.
consistency, right?
This is something we're very aware of. And
We are.
There are some teachers that really love going out and finding those grants.
Yeah.
And there's other teachers, that have other ways of looking at the work that they're doing in their classroom.
Or, and to add to that, Dr. Shields, you have some school leaders who lead a school building who are more inclined to push certain things, and then you see those things happen.
Yeah.
I can tell you that our partnerships with the organizations, whether it's Ed Foundation, Hearts, we meet with them. We go over the process with the administrators, the administrators go over the process with the teachers. And we continue to fan those flames and hopefully warn them, engage in those frankly. opportunities.
And they may be, but it's also a competition, right? There's only so much money in the
Excellent.
pot, so it
Right.
may be that more are engaging in the process, but just aren't winning. I don't know what words. I don't know the right word, so.
Successful.
But it's you know, it's important, I think, because we have so many elementary schools, especially compared to our surrounding, actually almost all of our peer districts, that we really want to have equity, consistency to the greatest extent possible. And clearly there are some kids who are getting something of something that other kids aren't getting, but then other kids are getting something of something else that other kids aren't getting, but we just want to make sure it's balanced out, right?
Agreed.
I think your word encourage is important here, because, we can't require, but I wonder if there are ways that we could be actively encouraging, and I think it actually just goes hand in hand with sharing best practices, right? It's publicizing what the best things are that are being done, and not every educator will then wanna do the same thing but we do see that there are things, among the elementary schools that sort of catch, right? And move around some things that never do. But I do think that as an administration and a board, maybe we should be thinking about what that active encouragement looks like. And I know we have an extra administrator in curriculum this year. I wonder if there's something that we could be doing there to support this kind of grant writing. To see if there's more to be captured, right? Or at least to have it be done a little bit more equitably, because I know.
It seems really the outlier is Mannerhaven, right? The other two are really kind of 2 and 3 for building the Ed Foundation.
Outlier in terms of having more,
Yeah.
because the public doesn't have
Mannerhaven
access
has
to it.
much more.
I think that the other piece, when you're worried about an equity angle on this stuff, is that I think for other kinds of grants and monies, we're making sure that the funding to each building is the same. But I don't think this all goes into that because it's outside of our curricular offerings. But I don't.
Which was my philosophical issue with outside, it's always been my philosophical issue with outside money. It's a blessing and it's also a curse.
Right. I mean, look, the sticky wicket of equity is always, like, I personally don't think that equity should be everybody does without, right? That's the problem, that's the downside.
Yeah.
But how to make sure that everybody could have, is important. And then there will be differences, although I believe that the Ed Foundation Board does look at trying to be equitable, on what they're giving out, so.
Okay. All right.
To be continued.
To be continued. So any other comments from the committee or Dr. Hines, just committee comments? Okay. Jessica, why don't I take you only because I know that Emily's had a couple comments already.
Sure, I just want to make a comment on these donations discussion, from the perspective of the HSAs. I don't speak on behalf of the HSAs or Parents Council or the Ed Foundation, even though I have been or am currently involved in all of the above. The district bears the responsibility of maintaining equity across our schools when it comes to grants and donations from community. It is not on the organizations. It is their, for the HSAs especially, it is their job to serve their students. There is a benefit to serving the whole community, but that is the only thing within their control. For outside organizations like the Ed Foundation, their mission is to provide enriching experiences and new opportunities to students based on what teachers and administrators come to them with in terms of grant requests. Every grant request has to go through a building administrator. So when you look at an elementary school, you might say, well, this class is getting this in this grade, but this class isn't. Or at Weber, where this house and this grade is getting this, but this house and this grade is getting nothing. That is not equitable, and that's the responsibility of the district in one way or another to facilitate. So, as a parent, as a community member, as an active volunteer in all of these organizations, I put that on you as a board and as district administrators to ensure that the distribution of these funds is equitable. It's not currently reflected in the policy. There was a lot of discussion about this policy last year. It's not currently reflected there in terms of how the district deals with grossly inequitable grant offers, for instance, and how that conversation happens with the grantors. So I think there might be more work to be done on this policy, but also within the regulations, within our buildings, across our buildings, how this functions, because it is not the granting organization's responsibility to look across every building and every grade and every colored house and determine where the funds are.
Agree with you 100%, and this policy, this was one of the last things I did 2 years ago when I was the policy chair. And I remember
This
asking,
updated March 2023.
I would remember asking for the, this was one of the last things I did, yeah, it was earlier than that. 'cause
We
I
reviewed it the first year that you were chair, and it didn't get finished until 23.
Okay, because I remember putting in the language about asking for the annual report, and I remember the conversation around that, but be that as it may. But I do remember the conversation about equity. And there were some board members who were very vocal about, well, what if we have one donor who loves one elementary school, right? And we don't want to chill that wonderful donation just because we're gonna say, well, we don't have equity in other places. So that's, and that was when I said, this is why I don't like outside donations, because it's not coming from the same central pot that our budget comes from, right? It's not worked on by the building principals and by the superintendent in the building office, it's coming from outside, it's being dictated by the outside. So that's a philosophical issue, so I'll just say that, and I agree that because it is what it is, that maybe there is something internally, I think we just haven't figured out exactly what it is to make sure that there is more equity. But I agree with you, it's not on the outside organizations.
Right,
To
and
figure out what that
I think
equity
this
should
policy
be.
could benefit potentially from some regulation around there really outlining what the guidance is and how monies are solicited and distributed.
So regulation. That's,
Yeah, just wanna, I'm not pushing back, it's more of a clarification. No, I will if I need to, I just wanna clarify them. So let's say building X in 5th grade receives $2,000 for whatever opportunity. Is the request or is the ask that all 5th grades in every school receive the same thing? Is that what it is, just to clarify? So because I'm getting yeses and I'm getting nos, so I just wanna clarify,
Did you know about
so
that?
I
If
understand.
the administrators agree
I'm not.
that that has value to all 5th graders, it can't only have value to 5th graders in one school. They're not vastly different than 5th graders in the other school, but if all of the administrators agree on the value it adds.
But we have teacher X in grade 5 in this school who completed a grant and it was awarded or whatever's happening. Then the district then should ensure that all 5th grades in all of the schools receive the same thing because teacher X did this for one class. I'm just clarifying.
So can I just add, I think the question, and this is what I agree wholeheartedly with what you just said, Jessica, and it was going to be my comment as well. If the Board of Education believes that equity is a priority across all schools, then it should be reflected in our policy. We spent a lot of time discussing it in meetings. We've never put it in the policy.
It's in the policy listed twice here, as I read it.
It's not, what I'm explaining is we should say that we expect or make an effort for it to be equitable. A donation should be equitable across all buildings. And I think that's your question that you're asking.
Yeah.
And more importantly, we've discussed it in the past where we did have, and we have had donors who come and make a donation and we don't want to turn them away. So I think somehow, though, the practice should be, maybe it is in regulation, that when a 5th grade teacher goes and gets a grant, it should be that they're getting it on behalf of their class, but for the entire building or at some, I don't know what the regulation
Or with the
is.
expectation that maybe this is a pilot and they wanna try it in one building, in one grade where it's contained, but with the expectation that it's
The
scalable
district.
if it has value, and the district will then own it.
So when it's scaled up, the district absorbs that cost.
Mosaic, that's a perfect
That's a great
example, right?
Great example.
Great example, and we are absorbing costs as a school district now after all of the fundraising and the coordination across it, right?
But I also think there are, and again, I'm so glad we're talking about this because I feel the same way. It's just, imagine this, because for every mosaic example, there are 47 other examples the other way.
Right.
And so then the question becomes, for the ones that are not as large as mosaic, how do we manage that?
Yeah, I think it creates a tone, if that's the direction that we went in. It
Yeah.
creates a tone that any idea that's brought forward that has a cost to it must be embraced by all.
Correct.
And that's very hard to get through, because, you know, I mean, you take your fifth grade example, we have 4 teachers on fifth grade, we have 5 elementary schools. We now need 20 people to say that is a good idea to move forward because of that one.
That's right.
But
Grade
it's,
level.
right, but it's not just cost, right? Like, we have organizations that would be very willing and able to fund an equitable distribution of the funds, but you have teachers that either don't see the value, or don't wanna take the time, or don't wanna deal with the logistics of a field trip, or
Or
whatever it
correct.
is. There are all of those things that I think need to be addressed, because the impact on the community is one of, in some cases, gross inequity.
Yes, and the other problem is that with the Ed Foundation, because, you know, there's maybe like one grant available for the Buddies program, or I can't, there's so many different, the sign language, or the ASL at Weber, you know, for one house. Because that money coming out of the Ed Foundation is finite, I don't know how you get the money for that to be in all the classrooms. Right, so this is why I say it's the blessing and the curse,
Yeah.
right? So, the circus thing that Salem does, right? I don't know where that money comes from, I don't know if it's a foundation or a different grant, but if it were to be replicated in all the schools, like all these different wonderful learning opportunities, enriching wonderful learning opportunities that are in pockets because of the money, right? And so this is the conundrum, and I don't wanna put the Ed Foundation out of business, but we also have to figure out, I think, how I think it's never gonna be exactly equal. So long as we have outside money coming in whatever form, we are never going to have equality. We may have parity.
Yeah.
So some type of internal, can I just, go ahead.
I think, I
Which is what we
happen
talked
to
about
think that,
2 years ago.
we should never be saying that it has to be in every single school the same. I don't think it's financially feasible. I don't think that the administration could fund it. I think you're complicating applying for all these grants, but I think the important word there is pilot, which is actually what I was thinking. That Ms. Malwani saved me from having to say I disagreed with her for like the first time ever, because normally I completely agree by saying pilot. Because I think there is a value to workshopping new ideas. And I think that if we in policy are mandating that everything has to look the same at every school, it's almost a throwback to the kind of education that we're trying to step away from, which is the education that prepares children to work on an assembly line. And we're trying to have project-based learning and understanding of different kinds of learning environments, and have an education that's much more dynamic. And if we have that, there's always going to be differences between our elementary schools, because we have 5 elementary schools. To me, the important part is what role does the board play and what role does the administration play in trying to create equality among what is offered, even if it is not exactly the same at every elementary school. And maybe that is a better way of highlighting the amazing things that are happening for each school. Maybe it's a better system for teachers among the elementary schools to understand what grants are being applied for at the other schools while they're still in process. Because there are partnerships that happen where there are teachers at two different elementary schools that both apply for a grant together.
Sure.
But I think this is my sense and my guess, that's informal at this point. That's teacher at X elementary school knows teacher at Y elementary school. They both really think coding is important and should be part of the educational program. They apply for the grant together. It's not because we have any formal communication that, hey, this would be a great thing to have at this grade level. I think that's where the work needs to be done, because I just don't think it's realistic to say, every school that does X, 4 other schools have to do it. We have to go find a teacher at those schools who will also do this. Because the other piece is, that's not actually the best way to deliver education, right? Because the teacher at A school might be super excited about this. You then force B, C, D, E to do the exact same thing. They're not excited. It's not gonna be as good at that school, right?
Yeah, I just want to be mindful of the time.
Yes, along those lines though, we, maybe having Dr. Feeney, because he's focused on consistency and he's focused on curriculum, maybe he could be a wonderful liaison in terms of seeing the richness of what's available, looking more equitable across our buildings, because he is the one that inspires the teachers to, pursue PD and pursue, additional wonderful things in our students' classrooms. So maybe Dr. Feeney has an idea of how we can impact the equity of this conversation, maybe more through his office.
I think facilitating the understanding of the grants itself too could be helpful, because I think if you've never written a grant, it could be intimidating to think about writing a grant to Hearts or the Ed Foundation. But when you go in and you look at those 2 grant applications, it's not like applying for a grant for federal funding, right? This is not gonna be your full-time job to write this grant. Maybe simply having an opportunity for teachers to work with someone to understand what they would need to do to write a grant, or, some information that goes out from the administrators at the beginning of the school year. Hey, by the way, the grant deadlines are this date and this date, and last year we had these programs in our school, and those were the subject of these grants, and if you have any ideas, start thinking now, right? And start talking to us now.
Were there any other comments?
I just want to add that this policy is not about grants per se. I mean, we're spending a lot of time on grants. It's about gifts from the public, right? And part of that was, and I think what you started to discuss, Dr. Shields, is that you had this manual give us, the board, a list of donations per building. And the point of it was for us to see as a board whether or not we were getting equitable donations from the public, not about grants, not about teachers, not about programs, not about pilots. So that is included because the grants from the Ed Foundation. The Ed Foundation does give notice to all schools when the grant timeline is, so does Hearts, and what the grants have been.
do.
So, right, so I think what the question really regarding policy is, do we as a Board of Education believe that this is the right policy, and is the wording for our policy correct? Because that's how we govern, not, so what I pointed out earlier is that perhaps if the Board of Education thinks, based on the document that we have seen only, and we as the Board of Education have seen it only, based on that document, if we feel that there are inequities across buildings, then we should make it a point to include some sort of statement in this policy that says we reserve the right to redistribute funds. So that if I'm a donor, again, this is a question that the Board of Education
The
can
policy
have.
committee discussed
We
this
did.
last year. We
Right.
had this
And
conversation
you
before,
decided against it.
and we decided against it.
Right, so why are we discussing the policy then? It's my
To talk
question.
about, because we have the further information and to talk
So-
about.
The
grants.
first sentence says, it is the goal of the Board of
I-
Education, right, blah, 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 and to monitor the distribution to minimize disparities, which is
Correct.
another way of saying equity.
So we've monitored, so I think the question then in this meeting is that so the policy committee has looked at the data that Ms. Manuel gave us, and the policy committee believes that it's equitable, and therefore, we're good. That's really the conversation then for this meeting.
I mean, I think that we're talking about the grants at so much length because that's the part where we have a concern about inequity.
But I don't know that I don't know where that concern comes from. Is that your concern, or is that the Board of Education's concern?
Well, there is inequity if you look at the numbers.
We've
There
had,
is an
we've had
inequity.
this conversation
We go to
as
the
a
grants.
policy committee before.
But I'm asking
And-
where the process is. So whose
So-
concern is it?
I think it's the policy committee's
So you should
concern.
take it to the Board of Education and let the Board of Education discuss whether or not the entire Board of Education is concerned about that.
Done.
Right?
Okay, I mean, we can do that,
But that's the process.
Yes,
but the
it starts
process
here, it
is
has to start
always-
here.
the policy committee always discusses the policy and then makes a recommendation, right? And this policy is almost done, we discussed last year and the
It
year
was
before.
approved March of 23rd.
Right, we discussed last year and the year before at great length.
Right.
The issue of whether or not to add any language about reserving the right to move donations around, and we didn't want to do that because we were afraid of chilling donations. And we believed that we were equitable behind the scenes. We are making sure that the educational program and the richness of the educational program is the same. The grants are outside of that, which is why it was raised back.
And there is language in here, approval should depend on factors including but not limited to its impact on equitable distribution of district resources.
Right, so I guess the question is, we were just talking about it, just to talk about it, because we're not making any recommendations for changes to the policy. That's my question right now.
No recommendation for change to the policy, but given the review of the numbers within the policy committee pursuant to the directive in the policy, the recommendation will come to have this as a board discussion at the next meeting. I'll put it on for new business.
Put it on your policy
It's under
update.
policy
It's under your
update.
policy.
But
Are
we
you
should have a
recommending
discussion.
a
We'll
change?
put your recommendation under there, and then we'll have the discussion at that point, right?
I would-
So also with regards to policy number 4420, class size, so I guess my other question again was, why were we discussing it again? I think though, we did get to the point where if we as a Board of Education can get numbers from the administrators, I think that's what you wound up saying, what it would be if we, before 2013, when we added 2 students, would that impact budgetary? How would that in today's budget world? And what about the spacing? In other words, do we have the building capacity? So I'm guessing that that's going to be the follow-up for the next discussion on this, regarding this policy. 'Cause
Yes,
otherwise-
well, we
That's
discussed
Dr.
that's
Lynn said he
exactly
was
what.
going to do.
Right, so I guess, I'm guessing you're gonna bring that back to the next policy committee meeting, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so what I would also like to just ask with regards to that policy, we as a Board of Education get the list of classes that are above class size and below class size. We usually get them sometime in the beginning of the school year. It is not reflected in this policy, the timeline or the fact that we actually. So I think it'd be good, because we did run into some situations in the past where we didn't have the timeline and it didn't get done in time. So when you're re-looking at this policy next time, if you could maybe include where it says, the Board of Education, but, where we basically put in a time, the date is what I'm saying. Or by the beginning of the quarter, like for the high school, yes, it has to be after the drop date on the first semester. Somehow, if we can include the timing, I think it'll help to give guidelines a little bit more structure.
So that, you want that in policy or regulation?
It probably could be in the policy. I don't know that,
I mean,
I don't know.
the policy at this point says that they are scheduled with notice to the Board of Education.
All it says notice, right?
Yeah, you want a specific date.
I just
or
think,
month.
I'm just saying notice twice a year, or notice the beginning of every year.
Okay.
Like, I also
Clarify.
don't think we've never really looked in the past for the minimums. So, of the recent past, let me just be a little bit more specific, of the recent past, we used to go through the minimums, and we used to be really good about approving the classes that were below the minimum, a lot of which have to be approved because they're labs and whatnot, or because it's a gym class so there are things that have to be that way, but I think we should also be a little bit more scrupulous about the minimum classes, because
I mean, we get notification of.
Yeah, you get a report
We
every
don't,
year, well,
well, we haven't, the past, definitely not last year, we did not approve the minimum classes. We approved the maximum, the above maximum. We did not approve the below minimum. So we should be a
I
little
thought
bit,
they were on
Absolutely.
an agenda.
we definitely did.
we didn't. But it's okay, I'm telling you that we should.
We were sent the document that listed the aboves and the belows, and we were asked if we approved of what was presented to us.
We approve the above the maximum. So what I'm saying is, we should include the down information in our policy, so we are all on the same page at all times.
I'd love to know, I know we're out of time, but like maybe when we discuss it again, if the administration thinks there's like a date we should add, I personally wouldn't make it like twice a year. I would have a beginning of the year and then as necessary or something. But however, things crop up, right? But I think we should just hear from the two of you what you think.
Yeah, we can make a recommendation at the next meeting.
Right.
As a group.
Great.
Is that?
Can I just ask really quick, I'm sorry, on policy 1300, just to point under fees, the second to last bullet, where we talk about after-school childcare programs, we noticed the JCC and kids support, and that's also listed in regulation later. We have changed the mechanism of which we do our business, so we may not want to be so specific in the policy since you're already looking at it, just a little nuance factor there.
Right, you mean like such as the JCC?
Yes. And kids, I mean, so we handle things differently, so
Yeah.
again, that aspect of it may, since you're looking at the policy.
Simply delete that language.
Yeah,
Yeah, have them both circled, but I thought we were discussing this again next month, so I didn't know.
Okay, I almost held to my promise.
broke your promise in the first hour.
And now I forgot it. Now I'm not gonna break it any further. Okay, without any further ado, are we adjourned? Yes? Okay, our next meeting, I just had that piece of paper, is in October sometime. October 20th, Friday, October 20th, 10:30, same place. Thank you very much. And obviously, if there are any clarifications, reach out to me. If you want to discuss the public.
Thank you.
It's all right. So I saw the heading.
It's a rainy day, I feel the same way.